The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Paranormal Radio Network. I want to welcome everybody here and hope everybody is staying safe. And I want to thank you again, those listening here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. If you do have questions tonight, you can private chat them to either H. Foister or Ceiling Cat or Jeffrey Gould, and we will get those answered for you. So, with us tonight we have Barbara Duncan.
I am here.
And we have Jeffrey Gould.
Hello. Hello.
And we have our other co-host, and I'm going to let Jeff introduce here in a minute. He's pretty much a regular here, and we get all the lowdown information from him. So, Jeff, you want to go ahead and introduce our guest?
Sure. Well, tonight we have one of our favorite returning guests, almost a monthly guest now, Thomas Wertman. He's a former dean of the American National University, the state director at MUFON, and former co-director at, but still that works with, the Cleveland Ufology Project. And he studied business human resources at Kaplan University. So welcome again, Thomas Wertman. Yay!
Hey, thank you for having me back again.
Yeah.
I knew I was in trouble the other night when Henry text me the other night.
It's almost been a full month.
I take it back. No, it was actually a week.
It was a week ago. Yeah, I didn't want to do it that
notice.
quick.
I take that back.
No, I give you a week.
when I get this thing, Jeffrey, it says, "How about the 13th?"
Nice.
But I love it. It's great.
Well, we got all kinds of stuff to talk about tonight. Barbara's even got some interesting stuff. And is there anything new going on with UFOs?
Well, I've got this story that came up right. It's about a week after we did the last show. I started getting emails, and the emails came in from a group I'm associated with, not MUFON, but another private group. And if I had my sound turned on for incoming email, it would have sounded probably like a Las Vegas slot machine going off. Because these guys, they just start piling on stories like this of interest when they start coming in. So, I mean, it went from like 0 to probably 20 some in a matter of a few hours. And the story originated in Brazil. And it goes back to something back earlier this year. An area, and I hope I'm pronouncing this correct, Meg, Brazil, which is roughly about 70 miles north of Rio. And, you know, there are times I would gladly take donations if somebody wants to send me down there to investigate, to go down to Rio for a week or so. But the story came in, and the bad part is when you get stories coming in from people, it goes back to an exercise I remember doing like back in college, where you take somebody outside of a room, you tell them a story. Then you have that person bring somebody else out. They are supposedly to repeat the story. And you go through about 10 people in a row, and then you go back and compare the original story to what it ended up being after 10 people. And that's what we're getting in this case to a degree. And what you also have to do, under Henry, is you add in social media in the form of like Twitter and Reddit. You start adding both of those in, and these stories get twisted around. Well, from the pieces I'm of my puzzle I'm putting all together, what happened was, as an individual, post on YouTube, which when somebody posts something on YouTube, to me, it kind of raises a red flag at times. It's like, why don't you report it to somebody else, like MUFON or some other organizations? And there's also UFO organizations down in the Brazil area. But it didn't come in through them. It comes right to YouTube. And this individual has an audio where they're basically driving, and they see this UFO crash in this region in Brazil. Yeah. They see the objects come down, they're describing, come down, boom, and they have this crash. And basically, end of story. Well, the local people in that region picked up on it, and there's a gentleman who runs a UFO magazine. It's run it like since the 1980s down in Brazil. His name, I'm trying to double check it. Again, I'm probably pronouncing it terribly, but it was like AJ Gravel, I believe his name was. Well, he got some individuals, and they started reaching out to try to investigate this story. Well, the problem is you've got somebody who posts something on YouTube, and you're trying to track the people down through YouTube, reaching out to them that way to get follow-up stories. And it appeared he wasn't having a whole lot of success. They also double-checked in the region to see if anybody had filed like reports with the police or anything like that, and nothing had come in. So they're kind of like hitting like a dead end from what I could tell from all the information I was getting. Well, the next thing you know, more videos pop up, because that's the great thing about YouTube is when somebody sees something happening in a certain region, you may have other individuals, posting their own videos of their own accounts. So here comes another video. This other video has like 3 lights dropping down, and they're kind of like coming down in streams. So it's already varying from the original story where the witness reported, again in audio form, basically UFO crashing. Here now we're seeing 3 lights in daytime hours dropping down. You also hear explosions going on. Well, people in that region started posting things and making comments that, hey, there's explosions going off down here. There's these mysterious lights going on. This doesn't happen in this region. We don't know what's really going on. And it starts gaining, traction that way. People start posting things on Reddit, posting things on Twitter about their own accounts. The video, they try to track the things down because, again, there's no official reports coming in. So somebody says, okay, let's go out to this region. Let's see if we can find some things going on. Well, one of the things they kind of found out is the original story they've been hitting a dead end on, and they were actually getting suspicious this thing may have been a hoax by its original perpetrator. But they couldn't get absolute positive proof. When they were comparing the second video back to the first person's account, here you had 3 lights dropping down, almost like flares streaming down. So the video account didn't match the description the first witness had. So you've got differences already. When they started talking to people in the region, there were people that are saying, oh, we don't have explosions out here. We don't have anything going on like that. This is highly unusual. The UFO group started digging in and found out that was kind of interesting because the Brazilian government has a munitions plant out there where they manufacture basically like artillery shells. They manufacture weapons, and they do testing in that same region. So here you've got some groups posting on the internet saying, no, this is highly unusual, yet here's a manufacturing facility right there that does it. It manufactures, and they openly test the weapons in that region. Then the next thing you know, you start getting the story going different directions. Guess what happens next, Henry? You get these aliens coming in.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, yeah. And people are telepathically receiving signals.
Really?
This goes back to something you may want to talk about later, Barbara, kind of like leading in your thing.
Telepathy, it saves on data overcharges.
Yeah, that's a good thing about it. So you've got these people receiving telepathic messages that there's aliens trapped inside this crashed UFO. And not only that, but there are children trapped inside that UFO. Now, the question is, are the children alien children, or were those abductees, child abductees? So here
or hybrids.
Or hybrids. Here comes this panic out again. Oh, my. And these things are starting to get posted again all over Twitter, all over Reddit. And now we add in another element that goes into conspiracy, because all of a sudden posts start getting removed from Reddit. They
From
start
Reddit?
disappearing.
Oh. Well, that's where Reddit started to become very censor heavy now too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so these people are seeing the posts coming down. They're getting upset because their posts are being removed about, their accounts. So it's adding detraction to this whole thing. Now we go one step farther under Henry with the alien thing. There are individuals reporting predators in the area.
Wait, like the movie Predator?
Yeah. And I've had that actually pop up a number of times in reports I've received, by the way, that individuals either had seen something that appeared to be like a predator being cloaked. They could see movement like in trees or something like that. Or the UFO itself had the same type of appearance. Wow. That it appeared like the cloak appearance. Well, these people were reporting basically predator-type aliens, but they weren't necessarily here for a benefit. They were meat-eating aliens roaming the region. So these stories were now popping up all over Reddit and the other sites down there.
Using mental telepathy to get people to come out so they can get more food.
That's correct. That's most likely correct.
There's one thing you don't want are aliens running up to you out of nowhere saying, just letting you know I'm a vegan.
Yeah, exactly. Would you like to come on board my ship for a meal?
Where's Arnold when you need him?
That was the first thing I thought of when I saw that posting is we need to send Schwarzenegger down there now.
They have their copy of How to Serve Man.
That's right.
Yeah, but there's
science.
Go ahead. There's a science scientist out there who was talking about this, about humans being raised as food, and that it was kind of highly unlikely, as we've evolved to be able to eat what's on the planet. Our digestive systems function that way. But if you get some alien out there, unless they have actually evolved to eating the same type of food that we do, we would be undigestible.
And
we're so full of processed food, just
exactly.
We're so bad for them.
And gluten.
Unless they're the ones that introduced all the processed food to make us palatable to them.
Oh, you never know. Maybe a little meat tenderizer or something. I don't know.
No.
but these
little Lowry seasoned salt, and we're delicious.
That's right. But I see all this story, building traction like this, and I picture what these investigators are going through down in Brazil, and I could see that some of the emails that were coming out of the group were like getting more, let's say, pointed in some of their descriptions, and they're getting very upset because here they are spending a lot of time investigating, and they're getting a number of these stories coming out, but they're not seeing any evidence behind anything. They also said that people went out to the region where these explosions were, and the next thing you know, they ran into military. Basically, individuals were blocking them off. These individuals reportedly try to fly drones back in the area. Okay, if we can't get in, let's fly drones over the area. Well, again, there were posts about people trying to fly drones, that the drones are either being shot down or drones are disappearing. Well, the problem is I think what a number of people were doing is when they're posting their things on these websites, sometimes they don't really look at what's really going on. Well, there was a military base out there, and the people were trying to get into a military base that's been there, they said, for a number of years. So it's natural that if this military base manufactures explosives or handles explosives, they're going to try to keep people out.
Oh, yeah.
But there is no evidence whatsoever of any drones being shot down. So what you had, I think, on here, Henry, is people adding stuff in to make an interesting story.
And it may not have been true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it goes back to that old saying that somebody told me about this saying, and they have it in Texas, that don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, you know? Well, that's what it sounds like in this case, because as it more gained traction, you had these people posting things about the telepathic aliens on board the ship, the children on board the ship, the predators roaming around. And the UFO investigation group was finding no evidence of anything like that whatsoever, other than it was apparent that there was testing of weapons at this military base. So at the end of the day, here comes this email out, and I've got it in front of me now, where the investigator basically was at wit's end. And they even tied a couple more things into it, by the way. They said that, well, maybe another reason that stuff is going on is because there's a Chinese rocket launched, and maybe this rocket, part of this rocket crashed, and they're trying to get to it. And they're like, seriously? You're throwing this stuff into it? Then they even had somebody who actually did die at the base where they're testing the weapons.
Oops.
Somebody was killed in an accident, but then they started changing that all around into connection with the whole UFO thing. So what you had is a story where somebody posted, and this is coming from the investigator in the region, it appears that somebody posted the audio. Somebody else came in and said, hey, let's add this into it. Let's add a video in. And the video didn't appear to even connect in any way to the original story. Then you have other people adding in their own comments on Reddit. And this whole story wasn't really tying all together. It looks like everybody's just throwing bits and pieces in. Then you add in the conspiracy thing, because of the post on Reddit and Twitter. You have the post being pulled down, which individuals thought, okay, they're pulling them down because they want to hide stuff.
Exactly. Well, you know what the Streisand effect is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. For those who don't know, it's essentially where something comes up on the internet and someone tries to suppress it, and instead of just leaving it alone and no one would notice it, now that it becomes controversial, so everyone's like, oh, what's that all about? And all of a sudden it attracts more attention to the topic at hand.
And that's what happened. And on Reddit, one of the moderators of the site basically came out and said that, these things were pulled down because they were hoaxes. There was no truth to what was being posted, and that was why it was done.
Uh-huh.
There was no conspiracy behind it, and that's their procedure on Reddit. So,
so that's not suspicious at all.
No. So what happens then is all those individuals go out and open up another site on Reddit under a different name and continue their post.
So I guess the inspector or the main UFO guy was trying to investigate how credible was he, or was he just adding into the story?
No, he was being very factual. He was following each of the facts as they went. And he could see that there weren't correlations between most everything that was coming in, either via like YouTube from the videos or coming in via the postings on the sites. It seemed like people were posting all these things that didn't seem connected together whatsoever. And his problem was he was just getting frustrated that it's hard to try to separate fact from fiction at this point, because the problem is you may have good stuff now being hidden within all this junk out there. In that same region, Henry, there was a UFO case going back a number of years ago, back into about 1957. There was a UFO down there that reportedly blew up, and I'm going out of memory here, reportedly blew up over a beach area in an area called Ubatuba. Well, this fisherman was out on a boat, sees this object coming down. It appears like it's going to crash, and all of a sudden it shoots straight back up and explodes. And it explodes in all these sparkling type of effects, just like a fireworks going off. He says most all of it goes into the ocean, but he's able to attain samples of some of this stuff, which they turned over to a local news agency, which had it analyzed. And if I remember correctly, they showed it was roughly about 89% magnesium, which was much higher content at that time of magnesium than materials which were being used for normal manufacture. They couldn't find a correlation to that amount of magnesium in a material that was being manufactured. It was very pure. Well, some of the samples of this recovery were destroyed in this first round of analysis, and there were a couple other samples left. Well, these samples started changing hands. So now you get a story where, okay, the samples were there. This is initial analysis. Why don't we go back and do more analysis to see, what these samples consist of if these numbers are accurate? Well, the samples went to APRO, which was a UFO group in the United States that's gone now. It also went to another organization in the United States, another UFO group, and they basically disappeared off and on for all these years. Well, it was about 2 years ago. I was at a private group of UFO researchers, and we're talking about things, and this case comes up. Well, this is one that, again, you've got the initial stories coming out. You've got some of the initial stories about the lab results. But the thing is, it started being looked at like maybe it was a hoax, going back the same way. Maybe this guy just posted something. But one thing I saw was interesting. He said the way that this thing burned, it was being described. Well, magnesium burns. Magnesium is used in fireworks. So possible, I don't know, but I would wonder about an alien craft being made of that high of magnesium, but who knows? Maybe they know something we don't. Well, at this meeting I'm at a couple years ago, one of the guys says, hey, I want to show you a sample of some material I've got that I was having analyzed. I said, where's it from? He goes, Ubatuba. And he told me about how the samples have been passed down over all these years. And when it changes hands, it kind of makes you wonder, okay, who tested these things? What was done? Did somebody substitute stuff? There's so many scenarios you could play out.
Not exactly a great chain of custody.
Now, in like 63 years, there's a lot that can go on, basically. Well, the thing is, okay, he says, go look at them. Well, he had them under a microscope, and what it reminded me of, under Jeffrey, is somebody took like a pencil eraser and took a razor and shaved off a few pieces. That was what he had. And it wasn't all the materials that were left over, but that was basically what he had. He'd had some sent out, and some of the initial findings were, okay, this thing is kind of unusual. But then again, as the testings went on, he wanted to have more testing done because, again, there are questions coming out that maybe the processes weren't accurate and that these samples were not as high of a grade as the original ones. But here comes the problem. What if the original samples were maybe another part of a ship or a much higher grade of magnesium? These samples came from someplace else. It may not have been the same material, since they're kind of like gathered up off of a beach. But this story, again, gains traction over all these years. It gets comments, gets repostings occasionally. But you have the people on social media making comments. You have facts. You have people adding their own interpretations, and how that story can change over all those years. And it's just separating the good stuff out from the bad. That's the challenge. And in that more recent case down in Brazil, I can just picture how frustrated the guy was if he drove out to this region, trying to talk to witnesses, finding out nobody's telling him stories like what really what supposedly happened. And he's wasting all this time, and it appears that a lot of the people were just making stuff up, just kind of piggybacking on the original story. But again, the danger is what if a good case comes in? Like, what if this Ubatuba case where somebody'd seen an explosion of UFO, piece reportedly recovered. What if that happened around the same time frame? Somebody might have just wiped that case out and said, that's just another hoax. Don't worry about it. So here you may have had something that's got much more potential being overlooked just because of a hoax that went out. And it did, by the way, get a lot of attention. It was popping up at tons of websites when I started researching it. And then what I did is I got this lengthy email from the guy who did the original investigation. That email was passed on to me of what his findings were, and he even put a video out going through his steps, what he did, everything else. And you could just see he was, let's just say, upset at the end of the video.
Right. Wow.
And his comment was, don't take this thing seriously. But that's why I don't personally post a ton of stuff on different websites, different social media sites. I just like to work directly with the people if possible when cases come in. And one of my friends was one that he would see stuff on the net, and he would try to get me tracking all these stories down. And I would say, well, why don't you do it? Well, you're an investigator. No, come on. Why don't you get out there? Why don't you take and call these people up? Why don't you drive out and talk to these people? Well, there's a lot of time. And, okay, that means you don't want to do it. Let's face facts. You don't want to do it. And he's one of these that, well, what if? And he tries to find holes and things that you have solid data on at times, which it kind of gets upsetting after a while. But that was one of the biggest things that just really popped up right after we talked last time, Henry.
Wow.
And this thing went on for about a week. All the emails back and forth, all the comments. And you'd have also people in there, giving hypothetical situations like, okay, let's see this UFO crash in this region. Let's take and see what we can find about this. And I always love some of the stuff that pops up. Like you had people looking on Google Earth posting videos of bright, shiny objects, which they said were UFOs in the region, which are actually reflections of roofs of houses.
Oh, great.
Well, if it would have crashed on a military base, you would have thought that the military people would have been doing something about it, not people trying to get in there. So.
Exactly. And you didn't, from the accounts, there was nothing unusual going on to the base.
Right.
It was just like business as normal. And then the ones who were claiming that they tried to fly drones in, nobody attempted to fly a drone in from the evidence I saw.
Right.
It was just people adding stories in that make something interesting.
Saying stuff, yeah.
Yeah. But it did make me think about flying drones in Area 51 sometime and seeing what would happen.
I'm sure they would track down who was controlling it.
I'm sure they would.
Target practice. Duck hunting on a high-tech level.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't think the drone would get very far. Something would happen to it, I'm sure.
It'd be an interesting test, but
well, they might have jamming devices in there, so you probably couldn't even control it then once it crossed over into the area.
Well, when I was out there, and that's been a number of years ago, so I know they've got advancement in electronics now, but you could see electronic devices all over the hills in the area going back to Area 51. And these things could have been anything from cameras to different electronic sensors. It's hard to say what all they had up there.
Right. Yeah, people that has been out there in some of the videos I've seen, they don't get very close to it, and you turn around and look, and they're sitting there looking at you.
Yeah, they were for me. I've got a rock on my desk from that area that I stole. You can't really bring back much as a souvenir when you're in the middle of the desert.
No, not much there.
But it's
bucket of sand.
But it's a reminder when I was out at Area 51. Something is a novelty. But that
So
was
do you
one
think,
thing.
yeah,
Go ahead.
these people are trying to deliberately sabotage the story?
Well, that was something I was talking with somebody else about the other night. I used to think years ago that, when you talk about providing disinformation, when you think about disinformation, you think, okay, you can have like a group of people together, sitting down, talking about things, making up stories, and then finding ways to dispense that information, either having somebody go to a meeting, which years ago, there were individuals coming into the UFO meetings, and they had some coming into the Cleveland group years ago that were suspicious. They thought they may have been somebody from the government because they came in one night. They appeared to be kind of like not the normal person you would have attending that meeting. They appeared to be maybe a little bit distant, but basically making notes on everything that was going on at the meeting, everything that was being discussed. So it's almost like they're taking notes to take back to somebody else to say, okay, this is what this group is doing. And when you go back farther, like you go back to the 60s, the 70s, you add in the Cold War, you add in what was called the Red Scare back in
That'd been,
the late
60s.
50s?
Yeah, late
50s,
early
60s.
60s. Yep.
You had UFO groups that were being considered in some ways almost like anti-American. So all this stuff you had going on, so there were stories of people most likely going out to monitor these groups, see what was going on, and potentially supply disinformation, because within these groups, and I've heard descriptions of the different groups in different ways. Some call them like amateur investigators, amateur UFO groups, which they basically are. But within these groups, you may have some individuals who have or are extremely knowledgeable about certain areas. With the Cleveland group, we had 3 physicists, people that were involved in physics in the group. And I could bring things in, and they would start looking at things in a very, very analytical point of view. It wasn't just like somebody was sitting around like a campfire talking about UFOs. They would actually look at things. We also had other individuals who would speak, let's say via Skype, over different theoretical engines for propulsion, different ways a UFO could move. We had those via Skype. And these were researchers. So we had a pretty diverse group of speakers. So when somebody says amateur, well, we had some people that had a fair amount of knowledge in the groups also. So I could see why they may want to monitor them. But when I thought about supplying the disinformation, anymore, you wouldn't necessarily have to go out to the groups unless it's something big. Now, let's say you put somebody out to a national symposium. You could get a large number of people at one time. And especially if somebody could get out and talk about things and, provide meetings at these groups. I mean, yeah, you could supply a lot of potential disinformation. But when I think of it now, where most people get their information from is the internet. The internet, or potentially books, but the internet primarily. And I'm thinking you wouldn't have to have like 10, 20, 30 people in a room sitting down coming up with stuff. I could get out there if I wanted to and sit on my computer, go into all these different little groups, and I could supply certain amounts of different disinformation under made-up names. And it would be pretty easy to do, I think. So it could be done, Henry, and I think very easily. The question is why and for what purpose? That would be the next thing. And then I couldn't say what would be going through their minds, but you could have a very, very good case coming out that you may want to, let's say, muddy the waters, make it more difficult to interpret the information.
Right.
The one down in Brazil that happened recently, I don't think that was the case at all. It appears that was just somebody who created a story. Right. And just a bunch of people piggybacked onto it. Okay. But there are other ones around the country which may not be the same. I mean, you may have a very, very good sighting, and then somebody may go in, and if it's posted on the internet, let's say it could be something as simple as YouTube, but Twitter, the different Facebook, the different ones on there, you could have somebody go in and supply basically information to discredit it, to really muddy the waters. That could happen.
Well, there's really no way to go into YouTube and analyze the video for doctoring, correct?
Well, the problem is different sites, when they post videos, some of them remove the metadata information inside of it, which to me is key. I like to go in and look at when the video was taken, the frame rate, any camera settings. I like to look at all the details in there. There's also some software I can use to do a frame-by-frame analysis. And what I'll look for is basically different compression within the image, where it looks like somebody may have taken an image at one resolution and put into another image with a different resolution. So look for little telltale signs like that. There was one I was looking at the other day. Matter of fact, it was one of the videos from Brazil. One I didn't mention about, Henry. You had one which was like 3 lights falling. But then another one, somebody else posted another video of an object that appeared to be triangular at night that was kind of like spinning at a high rate of speed. And the next thing you know, you see this blinding flash come down to the ground from this UFO, illuminating the whole region. And that one appeared to be more online of Sci-Fi Channel.
Right.
When I saw this one with the quality of video it had, what went through my mind right away was like Sharknado.
Well, that's better than Birdemic.
Oh, and it was right along those lines. And this is where, again, to me, it was a hoax, the whole thing. But going back to what your comment, though, if I wanted to discredit something, what's to say that somebody couldn't go out and create like a phony video, put it in this whole mix of all these other people with their own accounts to muddy the waters again?
Hide a card in the deck.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, supplying some disinformation.
I assume that you get a lot of that stuff. But if it comes in like to your office, most directors of the different MUFON, wouldn't they be able to go in and check all that stuff out, verify it first?
They can. The only thing that you run into, though, is take into account the number of different states, which, I mean, MUFON supplies a training to, their field investigators, state directors, etc. But it's how individuals utilize their knowledge, how to utilize the resources available, and how they interpret that information. So you can have different ones looking at these things, and you may have some differing opinions. That's, I guess, bottom line, the human factor that goes into the analysis. That can happen. I mean, to me, I think I'm fairly knowledgeable about the skill sets I have as far as applying them to a video analysis, other techniques along those lines, because another individual sent me a video, and they said, well, somebody else had already looked at it, and I said, well, did they look at the shadows within the videos? You're telling me these effects were going on, but they look at the shadows. What do you mean? And nobody looked at the shadows. I said, well, the shadows can tell you where the object was because of where the shadow was falling from this object. This object was supposedly by some trees, and I was looking for shadows in trees based on where the lighting was coming from. And it was just nobody had looked at that, and that one kind of just story just kind of ran out because evidently the person didn't want me to look at the video as close as what I was.
Ah. Yeah, and we don't want you to find out that it's not real.
Well, and that was the unfortunate thing, that the image it created in my mind by their response. But it's like, okay, that's what you want. Move on to the next case, you know. But we've had more hoaxes come in recently, and I think largely goes back to if the pandemic, you have more people free time on their hands.
Right, sitting around. What can I do? Yeah.
That's it. Let's see. I can watch Sharknado, or I can turn in some fake UFO reports.
Yeah. So
let's do.
But yeah, let's go back to what end. I mean, at this point, I think we've probably all convinced ourselves that there has to be extraterrestrial life out there somewhere. And when we start looking at now the age of private contractors getting into space, the government doesn't completely control the camera systems that are being live broadcast everywhere. I mean, sooner or later, if there is anything out there in the atmosphere, it's going to be on live feed somewhere, right?
I would think so. Because I since, like you say, you're pulling private industry in on it now. To me, it's, I don't know how their whole, let's say, video system is set up. But could you basically plug the hole in or put a finger in every hole in the dike, basically, of all these video feeds going out? You would think that if something is captured, somebody may shut off one video feed, but where's the other video feeds going? And you could have somebody as simple as sitting there at a computer, and if they can download that video and put it on the jump drive, that video, I would think, would get out eventually, So I think with the private industry, it's going to, I guess you could say, Barbara, decrease the chance of somebody shutting off feeds, basically.
Well, didn't NASA for a time do live feeds, and all of a sudden when stuff that probably they didn't want the public to see, all of a sudden, oh, we lost the feed, oops. And now they show them on a delay so that they can cut them off and in case any UFOs show up?
And it could be, but on the other hand, I remember watching the space launch a few weeks ago, and several times the astronauts requested basically a discontinuation of live feed.
Go to channel 2, yeah.
And it's because they had to go to the bathroom.
Oh, well,
I mean, to me, that's what popped up right away. He's probably got to go to the bathroom, and that would be kind of embarrassing,
Some stuff in zero-G you don't want to.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, also, when they made a point, too, when the second stage rocket lands out at sea, there's so much interference, electrical interference with the cameras, that it will shut off because the camera just gets overloaded. It will come right back on again once it lands because the EMF field is gone.
Yeah, and
so
I can see that too. Yeah, and if you think about it, I mean, just when like rockets or when capsules are re-entering the atmosphere, we go through a blackout stage.
Yeah,
and that's a normal stage. It's going to happen. And you mentioned the SpaceX, and I still love to see that rocket land on that pad.
Oh, every time it just brings tears to my eyes.
Every time, that is so incredible. That brings back the 1950 movies right away.
Yes, it does, and I just love the fact that we're doing that now.
But you think this is how far private industries brought us in a short time.
Yeah,
definitely. But I don't know if SpaceX does the 3-minute delay. I think a lot of that was also tied to the explosion that happened with the Challenger. But I've known people who look at the SpaceX live feed that happens, and they swear they see other objects out there. Now, some of it might just be stuff that happens when the stages detach. There's going to be that odd piece of metal that comes off, but not all of it.
And that's going to happen. You're going to have something potentially like that. You could even have potentially something like frost building up on the outside of the ship before it launches from the different fuels. But and it always gets me on some of these individuals who will go by the videos and look at them frame by frame. I wish I had that much time to go through these videos frame by frame. to look at this stuff. But you're right. And now you start adding in not just that launching, but all the other launchings and potential debris up in space. Right now, I mean, Elon Musk, they said the other day that they're up to like 540 Starlink satellites.
And they're starting to do beta tests.
Yeah, because they had to hit 400 and some before they could do beta testing. And the thing that amazes me about like SpaceX, and I can't say enough good about them, even though they're filling up the sky full of tons of satellites that are going to obstruct a view for potentially astronomers. But look at how fast they turned around and did like a manned launch. And then like a week later, or less than a week later, they launched 60 satellites with another rocket, and they recovered. They said now they've recovered like 40 some of those first stages.
Right.
That's incredible.
And he's really now pushing for the other rocket construction, which means lunar and possibly Martian landings at some point. He's really pushing that forward.
Wow. And it's the private business which is really pushing it, the private space industry.
And I can't remember where the car is now.
Dude, where's my car?
I can't remember how many miles in.
Oh, the convertible that you sent.
The Tesla's out in space, yeah. I just don't know where it is at the moment. But.
Well, you can actually find it on the internet.
Yeah.
There's a site that Where is the Roadster, basically.
Huh.
And the Roadster, by the way, I just pulled up a quick view on there as we're talking. You can't see it, but they're showing in respect that it shows Earth, it shows Mars, and it's farther away than Mars right now from the Earth.
Wow.
Based on the current trajectories.
So he should have put a camera in the car with a fake person at the steering wheel.
I think he's got a fake person.
They do.
Well, but do they have a dash cam?
They actually had, I thought, some videos coming back for a while until they got out of range.
Oh.
but they had a guy sitting in one of the spacesuits like they launched up to the space station. He was sitting behind a wheel.
Huh.
Oh, okay. I thought it was a mannequin or something.
But they said that most likely by the time it circles back around and comes back to Earth, the paint's going to be gone, the suit's going to be destroyed, the interior is going to be destroyed.
From debris?
From just the exposure to like radiation and so forth. Yeah.
Think about all the air that's inside, like the seals, seat covers, and all that stuff. That's going to be tearing itself out. Any liquid that might have been inside somewhere has all been either desiccated or boiled away. Yeah.
He could at least gave it to me before he did that. You know?
I was going to say, good luck with an oil change on that car.
There goes that warranty. I'll tell you. Pick a lane.
Some Martian's going to be flying by and call back home and say, "Look what I just found."
Yeah, exactly. See that one put up at some alien auction.
It's just going to be amazing.
Is this the best they can do for a spacecraft? Oh, yes.
So, I'm sure that you talked to other state directors. Has any of those directors ever seen a UFO?
Not all of them have. I have. I know, like our former state director, Bill Jones, he never had. He'd done this for like 20 some years. He never saw a UFO once. Bill Kokolewski, who's from Michigan.
Right.
Bill's actually had abduction experiences going way back. He's more like me, I guess you could say.
Right.
But it varies between each state director. I can't tell specifically by name which ones have and which ones haven't.
Could it be because some states actually have more activity than others?
And that could be the case, but the thing I'm always hesitant about, though, Henry, is when I see these postings. I was looking these over this week, getting some notes made for the show, and I was just looking to see how many sightings were in different states, and certain articles coming out and saying this is a hot spot. This is a hot spot, based on, let's say, for example, you've got 10 reports that came in from the state within a few days. Well, I look at it this way. One is, okay, 10 people turned reports in, but does that make that a hot spot? Not necessarily, because of the fact that you have 10 people who knew who to contact to turn a report into, first of all. You may have people in other states who may want to turn a report in or want to call up to report this to somebody. But first of all, they don't know who to go to. They may say, well, I'm not going to call the police and turn it in. You know, they probably won't do anything with it. I'm not going to call the FAA. So it just doesn't get turned in whatsoever. Then also in that region where, let's say you've got 10 cases that come in, how many of those are good cases? Did somebody see potentially aircraft that were misidentified? Did somebody see something that was truly unknown? And the way I've always looked at it is a hotspot doesn't just necessarily go along with the number of cases being turned in to MUFON or any other UFO group. To me, it's the number of cases which have, let's say, interesting data to support something unusual happened. That's what I really look for. Because I can go in and I was working a case that was sent in to me from a southern part of the state where it was actually turned in by law enforcement officers. These law enforcement officers had something hovering all over, and different ones may pick the story up and say, wow, the law enforcement guy saw it, and this is a hot spot now. Well, when I dug into it, there's an aircraft at 900 feet above them at 2 o'clock in the morning. What the aircraft was doing there, I don't know. It appeared to be almost flying around doing almost like a training at night, because they were flying kind of like erratic courses all over the region. And it was, I think the aircraft came from like Ohio State, I think it was, Ohio State Airport. But when different ones pick up on that, they see, oh, law enforcement, these guys saw it, so it's got to be a real case. And it wasn't necessarily the case. So you have to weed all these out, to me, to really get down to it. If I say that something is a hot spot, to me, that's because we've had cases coming in that really don't have an explanation. I can't explain what people saw. It could be 2 or 3 and not 10 or 15 or 20. California tends to have high numbers out where Jeffrey's at. And I can make the jokes about, well, yeah, it's those California people. That's why, out where Barbara's at, They're always seeing things. But also, you take an account that, to me, it doesn't go back to necessarily, one time I thought summer and winter is why you would see a difference. Well, it really goes back to the region specific and the climates and how many people are out at different times a year.
Right.
Because in California, you have more temperate weather in most parts of the state year round. So you're going to have more sightings coming in over the long haul of the year compared to, let's say, a region up in the northern part where you get a lot more cold weather, like where I'm at in Ohio. We've got decent weather now, but we may have 4 bad months out of the year that the number of cases typically drop off just because people aren't outside.
Well, here's a question then. Well, people might be reticent to calling the police department or even MUFON about different sightings. They don't seem to be shy about putting it on social media or calling a newspaper.
No.
And several of the incidents or bright lights we have out here, the first people they call is the local newspaper or television channel.
And you're right. We get that here in our region too, Barbara, where I've had people who don't turn cases in, but the next thing you know, I see it on one of our local news channels. Matter of fact, one I did a couple years ago now, it's about a year and a half, 2 years ago, somebody posted a video down by Lake Erie. They said, here the Lake Erie lights are back again. Well, back in 2009, roughly, something like that, we had an individual who saw UFOs 10 nights in a row over Lake Erie. And there have been cases where people have reported seeing orbs, other types of moving lights over the lake. Well, this guy reported lights moving in the same direction. Basically, it would start after dusk. He would see them come in from a certain direction, turn a certain way. It was just like a regular event. Well, the local news channel got a hold of it, and I've got suspicions on how it happened. One is I dug into the case, I found out he was actually involved with the performing arts. And he was involved in some productions at Playhouse Square, which is our theater district. And I just wonder if connections didn't get made that way, that the next thing you know, these things get put on the local news. From the local news, after they pop up several nights in a row, MSNBC actually picked up on it. And MSNBC was actually reached out to me. They reached out to me, and they also reached out to Nick Pope, who was in England at the time, for his opinion of what was going on. But you had these lights going on a nightly basis. You had, again, the cases popping up, and eventually, by the way, those lights turned out to be aircraft. And the long story short was the individual had moved into an apartment right on the lake, and he wasn't used to seeing the lights every night over the lake. So he's just seeing aircraft coming into Cleveland Hopkins Airport, approaching and going into a landing pattern. Well, we had some other videos pop up, but again, that went to MSNBC. Some other videos pop up locally on another network, and I called them up. And I said, I'd like to give you an interpretation of what we're looking at. So they actually invited me down to their studio. But again, no official report came in. And I went down, and they put this thing on a 12-foot wide screen for me. And you could see a seagull flying across in front of the camera in high def. And this is what the witness had turned in. But again, the first thing that happened is this guy says, hey, look at what popped up on like this cam, live cam. Look at what popped up on this. Look at what popped up on that. And they went right to the local networks and not, like I say, the UFO research groups.
Right. Is it possible that they're not into the paranormal enough to even know that there are such UFO groups?
It's hard to say. But right now, I think people are going to be more aware of different UFO groups again because there's more television series is going to be coming out. When we had high number of reports is you had on Hangar 1, which is associated with MUFON. So the MUFON name was more out in front of the people. So that made us more visible, and that's I think why we saw more reports coming in, because after each episode, we'd see a high number of reports come in the next day just because of that association. The way I understand it, Honor Jeffrey, is there's Bryce Zabel, who did Dark Skies, the television series.
Oh, that was a while ago.
Yeah, he's going to be writing a TV series about Betty and Barney Hill.
Ooh.
Which was the interracial couple that had an experience back in the 1960s with abduction.
Did you ever see the TV movie with James Earl Jones?
Yeah, I saw that. With James Earl Jones and it was Estelle Parsons.
Yeah.
Yeah, Estelle Parsons. Yeah, the aliens were kind of like forgettable.
Well, they weren't exactly Close Encounters level, or anything, but it was a TV movie, and at the time, they were lucky to get a budget at all.
Yeah.
I think the whole budget went to their stars.
Oh, most likely. I mean, when you get James Earl Jones and Estelle Parsons, and that probably ate up the bulk of the budget
that was
there.
That was actually pre-Star Wars. if memory serves, wasn't it?
I think it was. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, it was.
And it was cheap. I had it the one time. I got a hold of a VHS copy that was transferred to digital, and I watched it one time. I'm like, oh, this is kind of bad. I'm thinking this really does need to be remade. And I guess they're going to put it into a series, the way I understand it.
I don't know why they just don't make the original Interrupted Journey version from the book. What was it, Bud Hopkins wrote? I think it was.
Well, let's see. The Interrupted Journey. No, that wasn't Bud Hopkins.
Who wrote that? I'm trying to remember.
And I've got 2 or 3 copies, I know.
Ah!
You got me. You got me typing real quick.
I'm seeing how fast I can type here.
Well, while you're looking that up, why don't we take us a break?
All right.
And
You're listening to the... Oh,
wait just a second here. I got to get ready first before you go hollering.
John Fuller. John Fuller.
John Fuller, there you go.
Yeah. I beat you.
Got distracted.
Get my thing up here.
Thanks, Henry.
Okay.
You distracted him.
No, you didn't distract me. I was trying to find
No,
it.
I was trying to type, and I said, "Oh, I have to do the thing." I started talking.
Yeah. All right. Jeff, why don't you, we'll be gone for, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes. Just remember the mics are live, so do your thing, Jeff.
All right. Well, you're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with your hosts Henry Foister, Barbara Duncan, Ceiling Cat there, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, and tonight's monthly returning guest, Tom Wertman. So stay tuned for more Paranormal View after the break.